Today I'm going to take a look at Tiny Core Linux, which is one of the smallest Linux distributions you can get with a graphical environment, because sometimes size does matter. Tiny Core Linux. Tiny Core Linux is an independent distribution. It is a fork from the old Damn Small Linux. There used to be a Linux distribution called Damn Small Linux. It has been dead for a number of years, but Tiny Core Linux grew out of the old Damn Small Linux. I'm reading a blurb here from distrowatch.com. This is the Tiny Core Linux page on DistroWatch. OS is, of course, Linux. It's an independent distro, originally forked from Damn Small. Architecture, they offer i486 and x86 architectures. For desktop environments, you have the options of DWM, Fluxbox, FLWM, GNOME, HackedBox, I'm not sure what that is, i3, IceWM, JWM, OpenBox, and WMFS. I can tell you by default, if you use the standard Tiny Core image, it uses just one window manager. FLWM is their default window manager. They do have a Tiny Core Pro edition that comes with a number of window managers installed out of the box, and you get to choose at the boot menu which window manager you would like to boot into. Let's see. Currently ranked number 86 in DistroWatch's top 100 page hit rankings. So pretty popular Linux distribution for what it is. Again, it's kind of a niche distribution. Tiny Core is a 12 megabyte download. 12 megabytes is the size of the ISO, extremely small. When you click download Tiny Core, within seconds you're done. It is built on a kind of stripped down Linux kernel. Again, the default window manager is FLWM, which stands for Fast Light Window Manager. The core runs entirely in memory and boots, of course, very fast. The user has complete control over applications and additional hardware to be supported. So there is a graphical package installer. Of course, it's going to be limited on what is in the Tiny Core repos. You're not going to find a lot of the big, robust programs that you're used to on a daily basis. Things like, well, for example, I'm using OBS to do this live stream. I could not do this running Tiny Core. I could not be living in Tiny Core and get something like OBS installed and stream from it. It's just not possible. Today, I'm going to take a look at Tiny Core inside a virtual machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download the ISO and I'm going to run through the install inside Virtualbox. Over at tinycorelinux.net, which is their official website here, if you go to the Downloads tab, you will notice they have three download images. They have the core, which is 11 megabytes in size. Core is the base system, which provides only a command line interface. Most of you will not want that. That's not what I'm going to take a look at today. Then we have Tiny Core, which is the recommended option for most users. That's a 16 megabyte image, and that actually does come with a graphical environment. It comes with the FLWM window manager, but it's still very stripped down, very lightweight. And then they have what is called Core Plus, which is rather bloated at 106 megs. But what you get with that extra ISO size, that image size, is Core Plus has an installation image on it. So it has an installer that you can run through and actually install Tiny Core. It also has some other extra firmware, the NDIS wrapper, support for non-US keyboards, and a remaster sys tool is also included on that image. I'm actually going to download the Core Plus image, the 106 megabyte image, because I want to run through that particular installation program. There's no installation program on the smaller images, but I have looked at the standard Tiny Core image recently, so I can tell you some of the differences between the two, and I will point those out. But I'm going to download Core Plus at 106 megabytes in size, and I'm going to load this up inside Virtualbox. Okay, so I've booted up the Core Plus image, and we have a boot menu, and the Core Plus image is the one that comes with several different window managers for you to choose from. Now, the standard Tiny Core image, the only thing in this boot menu is booting Tiny Core, which uses the FLWM window manager. But because I did the Core Plus, we have the options of booting into Joe's window manager, Ice window manager, Fluxbox, HackedBox, Open box, FLWM Classic, boot core with only X GUI. So that's, I guess, just an X session. We have some other stuff: installation extension, Wi-Fi extension, Wi-Fi plus firmware, yada yada yada. To show you the default Tiny Core, let's choose the first option in the boot menu, which is the default FLWM window manager. And this should take just a second to load. There really isn't much to this distribution. Okay, and that's it. So we are inside Tiny Core. Again, it uses the FLWM window manager, which stands for Fast Lightweight Window Manager. I never used this window manager before. I don't know anything about it. It does have a right-click menu, though. When you right-click, you do have Applications menu, System Tools. You can create a new desktop, and of course, you can exit. It also, Tiny Core, has this panel at the bottom. You know, my mouse is kind of spazzing out here. You notice I can't move my mouse past this point of the screen. I've been trying to play around with Tiny Core for the last couple of hours before making this video, and for some reason it has some issues inside VirtualBox. It doesn't matter what settings I give it, the mouse just, sometimes it wants to just get caught in a certain part of the screen, and I cannot escape that section of the screen. Eventually it does correct itself, and you know, like now all of a sudden I can get a little further down the screen, but I'm still waiting to eventually be able to get to this panel at the bottom. Let me pause the video. I'll start recording again once my mouse comes back to me. I'm still having some mouse issues. Okay, there it goes. All of a sudden, you know, I'm able to get to the panel at the bottom of the screen here. All right, and I'll cover some of what this panel at the bottom of the screen is, but the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to actually run through a Tiny Core install. So tc-install is here in the panel. Stands for, of course, Tiny Core install. All right, we have the options of, you know, where to the path to actually install Tiny Core to. Do we want to download Tiny Core from the internet? We installing it to a hard drive or a USB stick, yada yada yada. Are we giving it a whole partition or an existing partition? Anyway, I'm just going to quickly run through this install because it's such a small distribution. It takes seconds to install. Extended 4-file system is good for me. Let's see, boot option reference list, so we can add these different flags for boot options. I'm not going to play around with that at all. Install type, Core with the XGUI desktop or Core only with no GUI. Of course, I want the GUI. I want the graphical user interface. We also have the options of, do we need Wi-Fi support? I don't need Wi-Fi in this VM. If I was doing this on a laptop, yes, I would need Wi-Fi support. The NDIS wrapper, which is a Windows driver for wireless networking. We have wireless firmware as an option. I don't need to tick any of these on. In this other category, we have the installer application. Do I want to include that, you know, with the install? No, I never need to see this installer again once I have it installed. We also have the remaster tool. You know what? I will tick that on because I want to show you guys the remaster tool that comes with Tiny Core. We also have the option of non-US keyboard layout support. I don't need to tick that on. And that is it. I'm going to click proceed. It's writing zeros to the beginning of /dev/SDA. It's partitioning /dev/SDA. It's formatting /dev/SDA1. So it's formatting the drive, and it's writing to the disk, and installation is completed. There you go. That's the fastest Linux install of all time, I think. And the mouse is still kind of wigging out on me, but it doesn't matter. What I need to do at this point, I need to detach the ISO and reboot the machine to check out our freshly installed Tiny Core Linux. And I rebooted the machine, and wow, Tiny Core loaded up within seconds. You guys didn't even catch that because when I launched the virtual machine and then I started recording again, by the time I hit the start record button, I was already in Tiny Core. That was just blazing fast, how fast we got into the desktop environment or the window manager here. I'm still having problems with the mouse. Tiny Core just does not work in a virtual machine, but this was really my only option for recording TinyCore. The other option was to actually install it on physical hardware and try to record inside TinyCore. The problem is things like OBS and Simple Screen Recorder and those kinds of utilities that I would normally use to make these videos, they're not available in the TinyCore repos. So to actually live inside TinyCore and try to do a recording like this would be very challenging. The only other options would be to see if I could maybe do some kind of remote desktop recording. I'm not sure if any of that would be available other than maybe something like SSH, but that's not going to work very well either. So this very buggy virtual machine is all I can work with today. I'm going to go back to applications. How about system tools? We have a control panel. The control panel is also down here in the bar, but my mouse is not wanting to reach down there, so I'll just open it from the menu. This is the control panel. In the control panel, we have options for backing up and restoring our system. Let's see what program that is. It's not any program I recognize, but it looks like your standard backup and restore utility for creating snapshots. We have maintenance. Under the maintenance category, we also have date and time, I guess for setting date and time. We have network for setting up probably our wireless Wi-Fi drivers and that sort of thing. We have TC, WBAR config. WBAR is the panel at the bottom of the screen, which now my mouse all of a sudden has no problems getting to. This is WBAR. Very lightweight, very minimal dock or panel. Speaking of which, now that I can actually reach down here, let me show you some of the programs in WBAR. Control panel, which we already have open. Right before it, editor. Editor is just your simple editor. It's a plain text editor. The name of the program is actually editor. To launch it from a terminal, you would type editor. My mouse will not reach over to the side of the screen where I can hit the close button. The mouse problems are really bugging the hell out of me here inside this virtual machine. But again, I'm having to deal with this because installing it on physical hardware and trying to record inside TinyCore would provide some challenges in and of itself. We have this apps launcher here. First run. Would you like the system to pick the fastest mirror? Okay. So this is our graphical package manager here. It's called apps. At least that's what it's labeled at. In the WBAR, it's searching for the fastest mirror. It found the fastest mirror. Okay. Well, I'll come back to this in just a second, but let's get through the control panel that we had already opened up. So in the control panel, under utilities, we have mount tool, mouse tool. Now, mouse tool might be something we need to play with. Let me open that. Oh, it sets the mouse speed, right button, left button. Yeah, that really doesn't do much for me. We have system stats. We have wallpapers. Let's check that out. Are there any wallpapers available for us? Let's see. Background image. Install images from /opt/backgrounds directory. Okay. Guess there's no wallpapers to choose from. I wouldn't expect there to be any wallpapers to choose from other than this one default wallpaper with TinyCore on it. The reason is this is such a minimal distro. Wallpapers, these graphics would take up space. So under the setup column here, we have services. We have swap file tool, I guess to create a swap file if we need, additional swap space. We have terminal server and we have XVESA. Let me click XVESA. So this would be where we could set our resolution, our screen resolution, and we have options beginning with all the way down to 320 by 200, which is an extremely small screen resolution, up to 1024 by 768, which is what we're already in. So if I pick 1024 by 728, the next screen asks me about my mouse setup. So I could play around with this. I have options like USB, PS2, COM1 2 button, COM1 3 button, etc. You know what? I'm gonna just play around with one of these. How about option 7, COM1 3 button? Let's see. My mouse actually functions kind of normal now. It's working for the time being. I'm not sure if that really did anything or if I'm going to have problems later, but the mouse is actually moving across the entire screen, at least for the second. for a second here. All right, back to the apps program. Again, the apps program was right here in WBAR. This is kind of your graphical package manager. I guess it would be something kind of similar to Synaptic, except very, very minimal. Now, we have the options here: on boot, on demand, download plus load, download only. Now, on boot is those packages that you want to install and you want to always boot up every time you start TinyCore. On demand means you install them, but they're only going to launch when you decide to launch them. That'll be what I would do here. And then we need to click the apps button. Where are we getting these apps? We want to, of course, download them from their mirrors, their repos. So I click browse. Now, what program do I want to search for? Is HTOP in their repos? It is. So I'm going to click HTOP here. I think if I click go, it should install it. Yeah. We had the little terminal output here, and I think that was it. I think HTOP is now installed. Let's see. If I open a terminal and type HTOP. Wow. Yep. HTOP is installed. By the way, since we have HTOP open, let's check system resources here. I gave this machine 1 core, my 6-core CPU. It is using 0% of that CPU. RAM, we are using 50.3 megs of RAM. 50.3 megs of RAM. That's with the App Center open and with HTOP running. And of course, we still have this terminal window running too. That is an extremely small footprint there. You will not see another Linux distro with a memory footprint like TinyCore Linux. It's just impossible. Again, their standard TinyCore image is, 16 megs? Now, I installed the Core Plus, which came with some extra utilities, but really there's not much difference. What are the difference? This comes with Wi-Fi support, I think, installed out of the box. It comes with the Wi-Fi drivers, anyway, available to you out of the box, where the standard TinyCore does not, Ethernet only. This one also had the Remaster Sys tool, or Easy Remaster is the name of this program. What this does is Easy Remaster for use with Core, TinyCore, Core Plus versions 5 or later. This application will allow you to create a custom remastered ISO image of TinyCore. So you fool around with TinyCore, get the programs you need installed and configured. This allows you to create your own remaster sys image of your customized TinyCore. Really neat. So I'm going to play around with their little applications program a little bit further, because for most of you, and myself included, what is available? I already know I needed to use a VM today to take a look at TinyCore, because it would have been really hard for me to record my desktop and make this video inside TinyCore, because things like OBS are not available. OBS returns nothing. It returns emacs.obsolete, but that's not the program I was looking for. Of course, was the Open Broadcaster software. Is Simple Screen Recorder available? And no, it is not. Is Record My Desktop available? Record My Desktop is available, so I could at least use Record My Desktop. It's a GTK program. It's going to pull down, some GTK stuff probably, but I could record my desktop if I was living in TinyCore with this program, Record My Desktop. Now, how about recording audio? Since it's such a small distro, is ALSA installed by default? Probably not, but ALSA, of course, is in the repos. How about Pulse Audio? Pulse Audio is here as well. If I installed Pulse Audio, would the PAVU control, the Pulse Audio volume control, be available to me? It is. That's here. Now let's step up our game a little bit. Big graphical programs. Any chance GIMP is here? Wow, GIMP is actually in the repos. I did not expect that. How about LibreOffice? Wow, LibreOffice is here too. So the repos actually do have some programs I use on a daily basis. Others, are not available. Firefox, I'm sure, is probably in the repo. So we could install Firefox ESR, which is the extended support release of Firefox. A little bit different than the standard Firefox, but It's available. I wonder if Chromium is available. Chromium is also available. So there is some software available in the repos. Let me close the App Center. The mouse is still working fine for me. You know, changing that mouse setting in that X-VESA setting in the control center might have fixed my mouse problems. It hasn't given me any problems. It was buggy right up until I did that, but now everything's working fine. I do notice that HTOP is now has its own icon in WBAR, so I think what it does is in the control center or in the app center, when you download something, it creates a launcher for it in WBAR automatically. So that's really neat. Terminal. Let's open up the terminal. I believe the program that they're using for a terminal emulator is aterm. Aterm is a really minimal terminal emulator. So if I type aterm, yeah, it opens up another terminal, aterm. All right. If you're wondering what aterm is all about, man, aterm for the man page. Man is not installed. TinyCore is so tiny, they do not even have the man package installed for, you know, manual pages. Well, you know what? And I was mentioning the mouse hadn't been giving me problems, and now I can't even get to the close button over on aterm. That part of the screen the mouse won't move to, but I can exit out of the terminal. So we have aterm for our terminal. We have editor for our plain text editor. And other than the control center, and we have a run program launcher, basically, I believe the things we've launched recently should appear in this drop down, but nothing drops down. I guess we haven't really played around with it enough for anything to be in this application launcher, but I think I could just type the name of a program, HTOP, which we already installed, and it should launch it. Of course, HTOP has to be launched within a terminal, so that may not work. Let me try just aterm. Yeah, that works. Okay. And looks like my mouse is back to working right. So a little buggy inside a virtual machine, TinyCore, but overall, it's okay. This would probably be better as a live USB stick, to be honest. Of course, one thing to keep in mind if you're going to run TinyCore off a live USB is it doesn't have persistence. So the next time you reboot into TinyCore, it's just going to be plain vanilla TinyCore again. Anything you installed, like I had already installed HTOP here, it's not going to be installed the next time I boot into TinyCore if I'm running it off a live USB. Of course, I actually went through that very quick installer here, so I should have everything available to me the next time I run this VM. One quick thing I didn't check while I had the terminal open. How about uname -r? We are running kernel 4.14.10-TinyCore. So 4.14 is a fairly recent kernel. It was 4.14 LTS. No, I think the last LTS kernel was 4.15. So I don't think 4.14 is an LTS kernel. Overall, you know, what is my opinion of TinyCore Linux? TinyCore Linux is great for the right user. For those that are wanting the most minimal desktop Linux, you can get TinyCore Linux. Boots off of memory, requires, you know, really no disk space. If you wanted to do an install, this thing is so small, requires almost no hard drive space of any kind. Of course, I'm running it off of one core of my 6-core CPU, so you really don't need much of a CPU. You really don't need much system resources at all. This thing was running 50 megs of memory when I checked it in HTOP. Now, the flip side of that is, you know, for your standard Linux desktop user, certainly for your new Linux desktop user, they would not be happy with something like TinyCore Linux at all. For one thing, some of the more minimal ISOs of TinyCore don't even come with a graphical environment of any kind. Even their biggest ISO, this Core Plus ISO that I'm taking a look at here, you know, this comes with a window manager I've never even heard of, FLWM. You know, this is not exactly a full desktop environment. There is not much to this desktop. You have this one wallpaper, you have a right-click menu with a handful of programs available, and not much else. The App Center You know, it has some programs in it, you know, the GUI package manager, but it's not going to have everything that you're used to in your standard Linux repos with things like Debian and Arch and Gentoo. For example, a couple of the multimedia programs I use on a daily basis that are pretty much in everybody's repos, OBS and Simple Screen Recorder, they're not available on TinyCore. TinyCore, you know, Pulse Audio is not installed out of the box. We would have to actually install packages to get sound working in TinyCore. That's how minimal TinyCore is. Again, some of the images are not going to have Wi-Fi drivers installed. So it would be tough probably to get TinyCore up and running on some of your laptops. That could be an issue. So for the Linux enthusiasts, TinyCore is an amazing distro. Very small, extremely fast. For your typical Linux desktop user, TinyCore, it's not for you. So before I go, I do want to give a special thanks to my patrons: David, Carlos, Nick, Daniel, Brian, Leor, AK, Ron, Keith, Dan, Michael, Tony, Bruno, David, Mike, Silvio, Omar, Mark, Mr. Neely Pops, John, Carl, Greg, Rob, Matt, Christian, Tiedemann, Stephen Z, Eduardo, Alex, Jake, Benjamin, Stephen B, Marcus, Interceptor, Tubella, You Made, the first Paul, the second Paul, Chuck, Ben, John, Swami, Mr. Smarty Pants, and Dan. You guys rock. You guys help make this show possible. Peace, guys.